Well, welcome, and of course, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And here we are. So yesterday we had talked about the transition from the situation in the Midbar, in the wilderness, where they had the Mishkan to bring the offerings, and how they were going to be going in to the land of Canaan eventually, and going to be involved in a conquest and a distribution of the land, and the question of the status of the offerings and the service. And we had read in the Rashi yesterday that only that obligatory offerings could be brought to the Mishkan, offerings such as sin offerings or thanksgiving offerings, and the only kinds of offerings that could be offered up when they first got into the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan at the time, right? That they were allowed to set up altars in various places that were called bamot, high places. And on those altars, they were only allowed to bring personal offerings, that if they wanted to vow that a certain animal, that either a lamb or a goat or a calf or a cow or a bull, they could offer that up. But no other kind. So, or if they took on a vow saying they were going to bring a bull or a cow, or etc., that they could offer up on a bama. But they could not bring any of the offerings that are mentioned. So, for example, in the first part of Leviticus or Numbers, statutory offerings, they could not do that. And for that happened for the first 14 years. And then after 14 years, they established a shrine. We'll call it a shrine in Shiloh. And in Shiloh, they could bring these obligatory or statutory offerings. They could. But at the same time, the bamot were still permitted. There wasn't one unique place where they had to bring offerings. They were allowed to continue to practice at the shrines. And in fact, there was a time when it stopped at Shiloh and it went on to Nov and Givon and other places until Solomon finally built the temple in Jerusalem. And once the temple was built, the practices of offering sacrifices at the bamot was forbidden. And we read in the book of Kings how hard it was to stop this practice, because obviously people thought they were doing something good. And the prophets warned them about it. They really tried to centralize the offerings to the temple alone. And at that point, the practice of bamot was forbidden, but people kept doing it. We read this. So just to reiterate what happened. Golda, do you want a follow-up question? Okay.
No, thank you. That did it.
Okay,
perfect.
Qualified. Okay, thank you. Forgive me, I'm still having a little bit of congestion. So let's get back into the text here. So we're going to discuss this a little bit further. So you can see that here Deuteronomy is starting to turn to more specific mitzvot, and this specific one about worship. V'avartem et hayarden, you shall cross over the Jordan. V'yeshavtem ba'aretz, and you shall dwell in the land asher Hashem Elokechem manchiletchem, which the Lord your God is giving you as a possession. V'heiniach lachem, and he will give you rest. Mikol oivechem, from all your enemies, misaviv, around you. V'yishavtem betach, and you shall dwell securely. Rashi. V'avartem et hayarden v'yashavtem ba'aretz. You shall cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land. Tachlakuha, that you shall divide it up, right, apportion it to the various tribes. V'yehe kol echad makir et chelko, so that every person recognizes their specific portion They'll know where they are supposed to be. Ve'et shivto, and his tribe, because it was divided up according to tribes. V'hiniach lachem, okay. La'achar kibush, so he says, I said that it basically meant to give them rest after kibush, after the conquest, v'chaluk, and after apportioning the land, umenucha, and settling. So, and he quotes Judges 3, min hagoyim asher heniach Hashem, and from those nations where God had placed them, I'm going to say, or gave them, had placed around them, lenasot bam et Yisrael. I think this is a continuation of the Judges verse, to test through them the Israelites. End of it. Ve'ein zo ela bimei David, and this didn't happen until the days of King David. And we know that King David, had that up to the point of King David, they were constantly having fights with surrounding nations, and especially the Philistines, who also came in. I believe they came from Crete. They were a nation that came and settled in that area and had come from Crete. And so there was this competition between the Philistines and the Israelites for a long, long time, until David finally was able to subdue them. So, going to the next verse. V'haya hamakom asher yivchar Hashem Elokechem bo, and it shall be that the place which the Lord your God shall choose it, or in it, l'shaken shmo sham, to cause his name to abide there. Shama taviu, there you should bring et kol asher anochi mitzaveh etchem, all that which I command you. And goes into this. And these are now going to be statutory, right, offerings. And of course, we're referring now to the temple, but we'll take a look at the Rashi. Olotechem, your whole offerings. That was the first offering we mentioned in the book of Leviticus. V'zivchechem, and your sacrifices. Ma'asrotechem, your tithes. Utrumat yedchem, and the gift of your hands. This is an expression we've had before. I believe Rashi is going to tell us again what that's referring to. The chol mivchar nidrechem, and all the choice of your vows, asher tidru lashem, which you will vow to the Lord. So once you have this rest, right, at that point, v'haya hamakom, that place, b'nu lachem beit habechira, at that point, build for yourselves the chosen house, b'Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, v'chein hu omer b'David. And we see again how Scripture states when it comes to discussing David, and that's Samuel 2, the second book of Samuel, chapter 7. Vayhi, here's the quote, Vayhi ki yashav hamelech beveito, and it was when the king was dwelling in his house, his palace, right? V'Hashem heniach lo misaviv, and God had given him rest from all around, mikol oivav, from all his enemies. Vayomer hamelech, the king said, El Natan Hanavi, to Nathan the prophet, Re'ei na, please see, Anochi Yoshev bebeit arazim, I am living in a house of cedar, Va'aron ha'Elohim, but the ark of God, Yoshev betoch ha'yiri'ah, still remains in the curtains, with the curtains. So at this particular point, David actually had hoped to build the temple himself. And of course, we know the story, how Nathan initially says, that's wonderful, great idea. And then God appears to Nathan and says, David's hands, unfortunately, are stained with blood, but his son will, in fact, build the temple. So, Shama Taviu, there you shall bring, etc. Lamala Amur, the Inyan Shiloh, above where it talked about bringing offerings, it was stated with regards to Shiloh. The Kan Amur Inyan Yerushalayim, But here it's stated with regards to Jerusalem. Ulachach chelkam hakatuv. Okay, and for this reason, Scripture makes a distinction between Jerusalem and these shrines and Shiloh. Litain heter ben zo lezo. So one is that it gives a permission between one and the other, between Shiloh and Jerusalem. Okay, so in other words, that you could bring these particular offerings that are listed that we just mentioned to Shiloh as well. Mishecharva Shiloh, once Shiloh, when Shiloh was destroyed, Uva'u Nov, and they came to Nov, that was the second place. Lecharva Nov, and Nov was destroyed. Uva'a Legivon, and they came to Gibeon. Hayu Habamot Mutarot. At that point, those high places were still permissible. Ad Sheba'u LeYushalayim, until they came to Jerusalem. So the reason, the underlying reason for these two similar listings is to make a distinction, that the fact that they're not all put together is to make a distinction between the one situation and the other situation. That in one sense, they were similar in that one could bring statutory offerings to Shiloh and to Jerusalem. And in one sense, they were distinct in the sense that the Bamot were now forbidden in Jerusalem. Mivchar nidrechem, the choice of your vows. Melamed, it teaches you, we can infer from this, right? Sheyaviu min habuchar, that when you make such a gift, you should bring from the choicest. When you make a vow to bring something to God, to donate to the sanctuary, or to offer up a free will offering, you want to bring the best. And of course, this goes back to the story of Cain and Abel, where the implication is that Cain brought what was secondhand, and Abel brought the choicest. And it states specifically with Abel that he brought the best he had to offer, and Cain, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. Excuse me. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Atem, you, uvnechem, and your children, uvnot, or I should say, and your sons, uvnotechem, and your daughters, va'avdechem, and your servants, your male servants, va'amhotechem, and your maid servants, v'halevi, and the Levite, asher bisharechem, which is in your gates, who dwells amongst you, ki ein lo chelek v'nachala ichem, because he, that is the Levite, has no portion or inheritance with you. Ishamer lecha, be on guard, right? Take great care. Pen ta'aleh olotecha, lest you bring up your whole offerings, bechol makom, in any place, which you see. And this, of course, is the prohibition of the Bamot. So, and using this sort of, in strengthening this commandment by saying, be on guard, right? Hishamer lecha. And this is from the Sifrei. Litain lo taseh al hadavar. He says, what this makes, hishamer lecha, be on guard, is to make this into a negative commandment. It isn't just a statement, okay? It's not just saying, well, don't do that. It's saying, this is a command not to do it. B'chol makom asher tir'eh, any place that you see, asher ya'aleh belibcha. So Rashi's just simply, filling out the implication of that expression, which rises in your heart. In other words, whichever you want. Aval atam makriv, but in fact, you should bring offerings al pi navi. So I'll explain this in a minute. So, in other words, what's in your heart, aval atem makriv al pi navi, but you can bring offerings at the instruction of a prophet, and he gives the example, Kagon Eliyahu Bahar HaKarmel. So, for example, Elijah at Mount Carmel. So there's a big problem in the book of Kings, there is a place where Elijah wants to demonstrate to everyone that God is the true God. And at that time, we know Elijah lives at the time of Ahab, King Ahab, and his wife Jezebel, and there was a rampant idolatry, the practice of idolatry at that time, and an attempt to wipe out the practice of worshiping God. Elijah was, in fact, in fear of his life for for a certain period of time. Well, at a certain period of time, he brings the people to Mount Carmel, and he offers a test between himself and the prophets of Baal, the priests of Baal. And here he is on Mount Carmel, and he's not in Jerusalem. And we've been told that, and this already, of course, this is after the temple was constructed, and we're told here is Elijah on Mount Carmel offering an offering on a bama, essentially. And so what Rashi is doing is he's parsing the sentence here and saying, where you could put the emphasis. In other words, where you see. But the fact that Elijah told them to bring this offering on Mount Carmel is not included in this particular mitzvah. So that even though Israelites have to be very careful not to be bringing offerings wherever they think would be appropriate, if in fact a legitimate prophet of Hashem tells them to do this, it is permissible. And that this sentence gives them that idea that they can do that. Ki im b'makom. So we said you can't do it anywhere you like. Ki im b'makom asher yivchar Hashem, but in the place which the Lord will choose, ba'achad shvatecha, in one of your tribal areas, right, amongst one of your tribes, sham ta'ale olotecha, there you should bring up your whole offerings, v'sham ta'aseh kol asher, and there you should do kol asher Anochi mitzaveka, all that I command you. In other words, all those other offerings that were mentioned. And of course, it doesn't specifically mention Jerusalem here. It just mentions the idea of a chosen place. Be'echad shvatecha, amongst one of your tribes. And it turns out, of course, to be Bechelko shel Binyamin. Turns out to be in the portion of Benjamin. Ulamala hu'olmer, but above it says, Mikol shivtechem. It says, we'll choose from amongst all your tribes. Ha ketzad. So how do you harmonize these two, this apparent contradiction? And here we get it. Keshekana David, when David acquired or purchased et Hagoran me Aruna, when he purchased the threshing floor of Aruna, Hayavusi, the Jebusite. And we know that Yavus was another name for Jerusalem, right? When he purchased this threshing floor of Aruna, Gaba Hazahav Mikol Hashvatim. He collected the gold to pay for it from all the tribes. Umikol Makom, but nevertheless, Hagoran Bechalko shel Binyamin Haya. The granary was in that portion of Benjamin. And the idea that since everybody paid for it, it was everyone's. So that's how this is. And there's a lovely thought there that when you contribute to a community, acquisition, it belongs to all of you. And it's, of course, it's a privilege. There is a story, a really lovely story that is connected with the idea of the threshing floor of Aruna, and the story of the two brothers, one who was married and one and had a family, and the other one who was single, and they had come and harvested their grain, and they had put their piles of wheat. The one brother was on one side of the threshing floor, and the other brother had his material, his produce on the other side of the threshing floor. And in the middle of the night, each one of them woke up and said, the brother who was married and had a family thought to himself, my single brother, he doesn't have a family, he doesn't have anyone to take care of him in his old age, and he's living by himself. I'm going to go take some of my grain, my sacks of grain, and take it over to his side of the granary. And at the same time, the single brother woke up and said, I have a brother, he's got a wife, he has children, he has responsibilities, he has to take care of them. I don't need all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take some sacks of grain from my side and put them on his side of the granary. And the story goes as they both got up in the middle of the night and ready to do what they had decided they were going to do. And they bumped in the middle of the granary. They bumped into each other. And when God saw this, he said, this is the spot. I want my temple. And I think it's such a powerful story as to what religion should be about and what is acceptable, what is called, what in a sense is sort of the ultimate place in our hearts to put others before ourselves. I think it's so powerful that that's why God chose that location for the temple. So, here we go. Rak b'chol avat nafshecha tizbach. Okay. Rak generally is some kind of limitation, right? But we're going to go, I believe, into, okay, we'll see. This gets a little technical. This might be a good place for us to stop today. And I can pick this up tomorrow so that we'll have time to give it sufficient consideration. And that way I can end with what I hope you felt was a lovely story for today. There we go. So I'm going to stop the share. We have quite a bit of time now. If anybody would like to make any comments or thoughts.
I think, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You said something was a privilege.
I did.
I wondered why it wasn't a right there from what you were saying.
Oh, well, when people come and ask for funds for some community project, it's not necessarily that you must do it. It's even with the construction of the Mishkan back in Exodus, where we were reading about it, we were told it was a truma, which was considered a free will offering.
Thank you.
Right. So likewise, if you have a situation where there's some community project and you're given that opportunity. Lauren?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, in a sense, I mean, if you take it away from the, legal system on earth and put it in a more religious context, pretty much nothing is really a right. Everything is a gift and a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we certainly have legal rights on earth, but even our legal rights can be taken away from us and are still a gift. And if, like, one trick to having an outlook that may help you survive in the face of legal rights being taken away from you is seeing them as a gift and being grateful for what you do have left,
Right.
which are things, the few things that are in your control, specifically your attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a tough concept, but I believe it's true.
Right. How one looks at one's relationship to the rest of the world. And you've heard me say this many times, that one of the essential elements of believing in a divine creator is this notion of what is our relationship to the universe as insignificant individuals, nevertheless, having that ability. So I know this isn't quite the same thought, but I think of that wonderful statement that says there's one thing worse than having to pay taxes. not having to pay taxes. So, yeah. The idea of being custodians of our property and trying to live that way. So anyway, okay, we can stop here. I can stop the recording here and pick this up tomorrow. But it does get a little bit more technical, and I want to have the time to be able to explain what we're talking about. It's not unbelievable. As I said, it's just a little technical.